Welcome. This is the Saturday Night LaRouche PAC class. My name is Bruce Director. And tonight we have a very special presentation by Keisha Rogers on the subject of Donald Trump's uncle, John Trump. Trump, many of you know, frequently brings up, mentions his uncle, John Trump, as a famous MIT professor and leader, scientific leader in the primarily the 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. But very few people know who he is. And recently, some of his papers have been released, and Keisha's dug into them. And it's an extremely interesting story, which will give you a lot of insight, not only into John Trump, but also into the effect and the influence he had on the former and future president of the United States. So without further ado, let me just introduce Keisha. And Keisha, tell us, who is John Trump?
Thank you, Bruce. Okay, so I am very excited to have you on today, to have you all here. Today, we're going to discuss replacing endless wars with endless frontiers. And I really got excited about digging into this discussion because President Trump, as many of you know, has mentioned and has continued to express his commitment to putting an end to the endless wars. And what do you replace those endless wars with? That is endless frontiers. And you actually have to understand when President Trump came into office and he started to develop policies for scientific advancements in nuclear sciences, in space science, his commitment to launching a frontier and returning human beings to the moon and Mars, that this is something that came as a result of his understanding of the institution of the presidency and being connected to the institution of the presidency and to these scientific networks. Although a lot of people say, well, President Trump never was involved in the presidency. Well, that's true. He wasn't involved in the establishment presidency, but he was very much connected to the history that went back to the development of the frontier scientific advancements that came out of World War II, that came out of the period of John F. Kennedy, and that ultimately came out of the work that was being done in advancing sciences around President Ronald Reagan, who was also very instrumental to President Donald Trump. And a number of you probably have heard even more recently in Trump's response to putting an end to these endless wars and stopping the threat of nuclear war, he has continued to express his commitment to revamping what was known as the Strategic Defense Initiative. And he put forth a policy for missile defense. But Trump understands that in order to stop the policies toward war, mutually assured destruction, he understands something that goes back to what was at the center of President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, and that is the work that had been done, done for many years, that was advancing a scientific, technological advancement that led to the question of 40 years of space exploration. And this is something I've been working on and Bruce has been working on, who's here, because it was at the foundation of very important contributions made by economist and statesman Lyndon LaRouche. As we can discuss, a lot of what people hear about in terms of Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative was the mastermind of, and a lot of the work came from LaRouche, Lyndon LaRouche, and his work working with the Soviet Union in back-channel negotiations. And we'll get maybe into that a little bit later on, but I want to set the groundwork for this discussion. Why are we talking about John G. Trump? And President Donald Trump has many times mentioned that he had this great genius uncle who taught at MIT for over 40 years. And in order to understand the contributions of Trump, you actually have to understand his role in what some might refer to, what Mr. LaRouche used to call the brain trust, that was really working around President Franklin Roosevelt, and that led to some of the breakthroughs in scientific and technological research that helped to win the war with the Allied forces in World War II. And I'll go through in a few moments here two of the major breakthroughs that John G. Trump was working on. So before I do that, let me go through a little bit of who Trump was, some of his background. John G. Trump, the uncle of Donald Trump, he was the younger brother of Trump's father, Fred Trump, and he was born in New York area. This guy received his education through some of the leading scientific institutions. First of all, he got his undergraduate bachelor's of science degree at the Polytechnic Institute in 1929. Then in 1931, he got his Master of Science at the Columbia University. And finally, he got his doctorate's degree at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And once he was studying his mission, what he wanted to study was the electrostatic engineering, and he looked at the mechanics of electrostatic engineering. He wrote his thesis paper on electrostatic rotating machines. And so while going to MIT, when he first got there, he, starting on his doctorate's degree, he ran into and met with the then president of MIT and also the dean of engineering. He went into the engineering department, and Trump was in the engineering department for many years. But one of the very key individuals that he ran into was the president at MIT then, who was Vannevar Bush. And Vannevar Bush, what is very important when you want to understand the question of the history behind the institution of the presidency that was working in the scientific community under President Franklin Roosevelt. But at the time, Vannevar Bush had encouraged John G. Trump to go, because of his interest in the study of electrostatic engineering, to go and meet with one of the key professors of that time, whose name was Dr. Robert Van de Graaff. And Van de Graaff was already working on particle accelerators. He worked on one of the first particle accelerators that Van de Graaff's machines for the electrostatic generators, which he was starting to work on, were being looked at for advancements in particle accelerators. So later on, they worked on this together and continued to work on around 1937. Dr. John G. Trump and Robert Van de Graaff were working on the development of a 1 million volt X-ray generator. And this became instrumental because this 1 million volt X-ray generator, I think I might have a picture of it here. Let me see if I can show that to you. 1 second. Here we go. This generator was actually put what they were doing with these million-volt X-ray generators was developing high energetic electron machines for what would be later used in many advancements in medical and nuclear technology. And this is something that Van de Graaff was working on before with his the electrostatic, creating static electricity and in high voltage generators. But one of the major breakthroughs that came about as a result of the work of of John G. Trump and engineer Van de Graaff was through the advancements of these X-ray generators, million-volt X-ray generators, and they continued to advance throughout, was the breakthroughs that it brought about in radiation therapy. And this was very interesting to me because, as we have seen, President Donald Trump has really strongly committed to the advancements in both nuclear sciences, as I said, space sciences, but also in cancer research and cancer therapy. And his uncle was instrumental in advancements that came about as a result of the work that he was doing in the advancement of radiation therapy for cancer treatment. And I had a chance to watch, I'll share the video because it's pretty fascinating. There's a lot of research that has been made available. I should go back and say, interestingly enough, when President Trump started to talk about his uncle, one interesting development that happened is that he was meeting with a couple of the political people who were instrumental in founding the organization called True the Vote. And he met with a couple of those individuals at his home and told the guy by the name of Greg Phillips that you remind me of my Uncle John. And Greg went, these guys are from Houston, Texas, and they just got excited about it. And they actually went and collected quite a bit of fascinating work that you can find. So I'll post that, but they've made it public. It's called open.inc/collections/JGT, John G. Trump. So I'll post that for people who want to take a look into this. Now, also, John G. Trump actually did an interview later on in his life about his breakthroughs in radiation therapy. And this was done in 1978. And there's a interview that was done by Dr. Lawrence Taylor, who was also at MIT in the earlier days and working in the engineering department. The interview was called Vignettes of Early Radiation Workers. So I can post that because what he talks about there is how they were using these X-ray volt technologies to advance radiation therapy. And the first million-volt X-ray generator that was created by Van de Graaff and Trump was installed at the Huntington Hospital in Boston. And this was one of the first generators that was used to help treat cancer patients. And what they were doing is they were able to take these electron beams and take these generators and create the ability to target focus to a tumor, cancer tumor, by putting the patient in a rotating vacuum, which would allow for, the idea was that you can target the tumor without disrupting any of the good tissues. And so we've advanced this a lot. This led to some of what's called brachytherapy, and being able to target cancer cells without causing damage to other normal cells in the body. It also, some of this research also led to the further advancements in science, in medical technologies, the nuclear sciences, including being able to sterilize medical equipment. This is what the electron beams and the accelerators were able to create, the ability to sterilize medical equipment, to advance sciences in radiation therapy. And later on, it also led to the development of being able to use the X-ray technology that was able to actually make major advancements in the sterilization of, or should we say, allowing for food, your crops, to be prevented from having diseases, or having your crops be prevented from having types of pests and things that would get into your crops. They would use this type of technology in order to do that. So that just gives you an example. Now, I want to go back to what I was just discussing in terms of some of these masterminds who were working together, and what John G. Trump was a part of. So after the work of the generators that were put into these hospitals, the second hospital, the first one was, as I said, Huntington Beach in Boston, and that was in 1937. In 1938, you had the design of a new compact 1.25 million volt generator that was installed into what was called the Massachusetts General Hospital. And it was actually in use for about 17 years. So this was really treating a lot of patients. At the time, they were making major advancements and trying to make breakthrough research and treating patients in cancer therapy, cancer patients at this time. So this is what John G. Trump was involved in. Now, not long after that, you have then the work that he was doing on X-ray radiation got put to the side for a while because you had the beginnings of World War II. And so Trump started working during World War II in the advancement of radar. And so a lot of what we know in terms of some of the earlier stages of radar technology was to promote was really made in terms of a breakthrough in its advancements during World War II, was allowed for the Allied forces to be able to detect when the Nazis in Germany were sending their aircraft, because it would use radio waves and to find out where aircraft and the Nazi forces were sending the potential threat of weapons that would hit these Allied forces, and they were able to detect and stop them. So this was a major breakthrough in some of these developments. But this led to Donald Trump. He was working in the advancement of this radar technology, both during his service in World War II. He was actually asked by Dwight Eisenhower to go and set up the radar lab and help with the forces in Britain. And then later on, he actually went to France to set up the radar lab in France. And he was working at MIT for some of these advancements in radar technology under the development of who was under the development of Dr. Carl Compton. So Compton was the president of MIT, and he was the head of radar at MIT. And John Trump actually worked with him and was working as the secretary in on the microwave committee. He worked in the division of microwave technologies under radar with Compton. And this was very important because, as I said, Trump was a part of really a brain trust in the institution of the presidency. And this goes back to the name that I brought up earlier, which was Vannevar Bush. And this was somebody who also Mr. LaRouche used to talk about a lot in terms of his genius and scientific breakthroughs. But Vannevar Bush was instrumental during World War II because he actually was appointed by President Franklin Roosevelt to head up the Office of Science and Research and Development. And so this was, at the time, you had some of these leading scientists from the major institutions that were brought in by Vannevar Bush to be a part of the science committee. And that was started with the development of a National Defense Research Committee, which Vannevar Bush was heading up and a part of. And he picked 4 of the leading scientists to be a part of this committee for national defense research, and then that went on into the science and research development. And later on in the 1950s, it became the Science and Research Committee. So, but the people he chose for that were Dr. Carl Compton, who I mentioned was running the radar lab at MIT and was president of MIT. And then you also had the president of Harvard, Dr. Jewett, and the president of the National Academy of Sciences, and also the dean of the Graduate School of California Institute. So so you had MIT, you had the National Academy of Sciences, you had California Institute. So these were some of the major top scientists. And of course, as I said, at MIT, working in the lab directly with Compton was John G. Trump. So now I want to read something to you that really puts together this question of the understanding of peacetime measures for when ending the war, and how you're going to actually use how the spin-off technologies that were used in terms of winning the war with the Allied forces in World War II continue to represent major advancements in science, as we know at the time during the Manhattan Institute, the different labs that went up in various areas of the country. But during the time, following World War II, Franklin Roosevelt asked, as I said, Vannevar Bush to head up the Science and Research Committee, the Office of Science and Research and Development, and was discussing what were going to be the peacetime measures for developing breakthroughs in science and carrying those out into the population. So he asked Vannevar Bush to actually write a policy report on that. And this is what Franklin Roosevelt said about the importance of the Office of Science and Development. He said he's writing a letter to Vannevar Bush and saying, "Dear Dr. Bush, the Office of..." I have to put my glasses on. The Office of Scientific Research and Development, of which you are the director, represents a unique experiment of teamwork and cooperation in coordinating scientific research and in applying existing scientific knowledge to the solution of the technical problems paramount in war. Its work has been conducted in the utmost secrecy and carried on without public recognition of any kind, but its tangible results can be found in the communiques coming from the battlefronts all over the world. Someday the full story of achievements can be told. And so following this back and forth, Vannevar Bush wrote a report called Science, the Endless Frontiers. And the question of how you actually how you actually bring these technologies and advancements that were happening during war into the advancement of endless frontiers in science, breakthroughs in medicine, and all types of scientific advancements. And this is what Vannevar Bush was committed to doing and what was commissioned under President Franklin Roosevelt. And so I'll just read, it's a, like a 40-page report. It's very interesting. It's about, yeah. And he goes through what's needed in terms of taking the young people who are going into war and putting them to work, and some of the advancements of science that had been made during wartime efforts, and education and the importance of education and many other things. But in one part of the report, he talks about science is a proper concern of government. And it states, quote, it has been basic United States policy that government should foster the opening of new frontiers. It opened the seas to clipper ships and furnished land and pioneers. Although these frontiers have more or less disappeared, the frontiers of science remain. It is in keeping with the American tradition, one which has made the United States great, that new frontiers shall be made accessible for development by all American citizens. Moreover, since health, well-being, and security are proper concerns of government, scientific progress is and must be of vital interest to government. Without scientific progress, the national health would deteriorate. Without scientific progress, we could not hope for improvement in our standard of living or for an increased number of jobs for our citizens. And without scientific progress, we could not have maintained our liberties against tyranny. So I think that's very important. That was a part of the report that Vannevar Bush wrote. So the last thing I just want to bring it back to, as I said, is this is the understanding of President Donald Trump. And you have the institution of the presidency, which has been based on the idea of a brain trust of some of the greatest minds in scientific advancement that really go back to the foundation and the start of our nation. And then you look at that in terms of key areas in our history from the developments that took place under some of the great leaders of our country, like George Washington, Lincoln, what I was just discussing in terms of the peacetime efforts under President Franklin Roosevelt, and how John G. Trump was involved in that, and some of the scientific minds that he was working directly with, and his contributions to the war efforts and the advancements coming out of that. And then you also had that advancement that went into the space frontiers under Eisenhower, but then also that came more so in the public sector or under President John F. Kennedy with the Apollo program. And finally, as I said, what was going on in the continuation of those advancements of the need for new frontiers was very much fundamentally at the core of President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative. And so John G. Trump, as I said, I believe he was born in August of, John G. Trump was born in August of 1907, and he died in 1985. And he was working at MIT in terms of his entire career for well over 40 years. He was he continued to work at MIT until about retired in 1973, but he was emeritus professor until around 1980. And during the period, I believe, of 1946, he actually founded a what's called a high voltage engineering corporation with Van de Graaff, and they worked on developing these Van de Graaff generators along with a guy by the name of Dennis Robbins, who was also an engineer. And these generators have been used in major technologies in nuclear sciences, particle accelerators, advancements of many types. And he was the chairman of this group until maybe around the 1980s working. So these are some of the advancements of John G. Trump. And so finally, at the end of his life, after he had passed away, John G. Trump was in 1985. He died February 21st, 1985. And maybe a few weeks after he died, President Ronald Reagan held a ceremony honoring him with the Scientific Medal of Honor. But at the time there were 19 other scientists who had made breakthroughs in many advancements in space science, including George Low, who was very instrumental in the space program in NASA, some others who had made breakthroughs in radio astronomy and other areas of science and scientific advancement. And so John G. Trump was recognized for his work in both what he was able to do in the advancement of radar and also in the advancement that he made in medical sciences with the cancer therapy research that he was involved in. So it's interesting when you look at how President Donald Trump is really, his mindset has come from these major brain trusts that have been a part of the institution of the presidency. And he very much knows the history behind what was at the center of the Strategic Defense Initiative that goes way beyond mutually assured destruction and stopping missiles and nuclear weapons, but also how you take these technologies. And this was something Lyndon LaRouche at the time in 1986 wrote a paper and developed this concept even further by writing a report called Science and Technology Needed to Colonize Mars. I don't know how much Donald Trump knew about that or not, but he was very much directly involved with putting these policies forth within the Reagan administration, and Reagan was adopting these policies to work very closely with the Soviet Union at the time for cooperation. How do we bring about cooperation amongst the Soviet Union, Russians at the time, and also the United States in scientific advancements? We know what happened with that. We can go into some of the setbacks and what was happening, but that's not really where I want to go today. I want to kind of give you a sense of the breakthroughs in the technologies and the science that were leading toward these frontiers. And this is why Donald Trump is absolutely amazing from the standpoint of, how his understanding of why these endless frontiers as replacing endless wars is extremely important. So I will say it was interesting to learn that, as I said, President Reagan, he honored John G. Trump in 1985. I think in 1983, yes, about 2 years before, Donald Trump was at the White House in the stateroom. Donald Trump, as I don't even think he was thinking about being the president or anything at that time. He was working in building and construction, but he went to the White House to participate in an event that Reagan was holding. Reagan was a graduate of the Eureka College, and Trump was one of the contributors and working in terms of his support for Eureka College. But I just thought this was interesting because it was 6 months after Reagan announced his SDI that Trump was at the White House supporting and participating in a stateroom event of VIPs that were meeting with Ronald Reagan in 1983. And of course, as I said, then Reagan honored his uncle in 1985 during the ceremony for honoring 19 of the top major scientists and contributors. So that should give you an insight into the brilliant mind of John G. Trump, his work at MIT, and also give you a sense of what he was representing, as I said, around this fascinating group of scientists at the time. So with that, I will post a couple of links there and in the chat in terms of where you can find some of the works and start digging into this yourself. The vignettes on early radiation workers that I mentioned is a very excellent interview directly from 1978 with John G. Trump. And so with that, I'll just end there and take your questions.